Have you ever walked through a cemetery at dusk? There's a certain stillness, isn't there? A profound quiet that settles over the headstones as the sun dips below the horizon. It's a place of memory, of history, of final rest. But what if that rest wasn't so final? What if the stillness was just an illusion, broken each night after the last visitor leaves? This is the story of Arthur Penelligan, a man who spent 40 years of his life as the groundskeeper of the old Blackwood Cemetery, a sprawling, Gothic place on the outskirts of a forgotten town. Arthur knew every stone, every name, every crooked angel statue. He loved the peace of the place, but over the years, he started noticing things. Small things, at first. A flower bouquet moved from one grave to another. A gate he was sure he'd latched, found swinging open in the morning breeze. He dismissed it as tricks of the mind, or perhaps local kids playing pranks. But then, the disturbances became harder to ignore. It started with the dirt. Every morning, Arthur would find fresh earth scattered on the manicured grass pathways. Not just a little bit, but piles of it, as if someone had been digging. But no graves were ever disturbed. He'd check each one, his heart pounding, but they were all sealed, untouched. Yet the dirt kept appearing, rich and dark. Near the oldest section of the cemetery, a place the locals called the Whispering Grove. One day, a young historian named Eleanor came to Blackwood to study the town's founding families, many of whom were buried in the cemetery. She found Arthur meticulously sweeping a path, his brow furrowed in concentration. She introduced herself, and seeing his troubled expression, asked if everything was all right. Arthur, a man who usually kept to himself, found something trustworthy in her earnest eyes. He hesitated, then decided to confide in her. "It's the grounds," he said, his voice low. They shift." Eleanor looked puzzled. "The soil settles," she offered. "It's natural." Arthur shook his head, his gaze fixed on the distant, weeping willows of the grove. "No, not like that. It's more... active. The graves," he whispered, leaning closer. "I think they move at night." Eleanor, a woman of science and history, was skeptical. She thought perhaps the old man's solitary job was getting to him. But Arthur was insistent. He told her about the misplaced flowers, the open gates, and the mysterious piles of dirt. He explained that he'd tried to catch the culprits, staying late, but he'd always fall into an unnaturally deep sleep, only to wake at dawn with a pounding headache. He was convinced something strange was happening, something beyond simple vandalism. To prove he wasn't losing his mind, Arthur showed her his logbook. For years, he had been documenting the odd occurrences. Dates, times, specific locations, page after page of meticulous notes. Eleanor was intrigued by his dedication, if not his theory. She saw the genuine fear and confusion in his eyes. This wasn't a man spinning tailies. This was a man haunted by his workplace. He then led her to a small shed where he kept his tools. Tucked away in a corner, covered by a dusty top, was a series of plaster casts. He unveiled them carefully. They were footprints, but they were unlike any she had ever seen. They were barefoot, oddly shaped, and seemed to belong to dozens of different people, large and small, wide and narrow. "I find these every morning," Arthur said grimly. "In the fresh dirt. They lead from the graves, wander around the paths, and then they just stop. They never lead back." Eleanor examined the casts. They were bizarre, certainly, but she tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe it's a local club with a strange ritual, or people walking barefoot for some reason. Arthur shook his head again. For 40 years. And why do they always start at the headstones? It's like they... crawl out, take a little walk, and then vanish before the sun comes up. The historian in Eleanor was now fully hooked. This was a local legend in the making. She agreed to help Arthur get to the bottom of the mystery. Her first step was research. She spent days in the town's dusty archives, poring over old newspapers and records related to Blackwood Cemetery. What she found was startling. The cemetery was built on land that was once home to a nomadic community, known for their unique traditions regarding death. They didn't believe in permanent burial. Instead, they practiced something they called the Earth's Embrace, where they believed the spirits of their departed needed to remain connected to the living world, free to roam and watch over their loved ones. When the town was founded, the community was forcibly relocated, and the cemetery was built right over their sacred grounds. The records spoke of a curse, a warning from the community's elder that the dead would never truly rest there. Eleanor shared her findings with Arthur. He listened, his face pale. The stories of the nomadic tribe resonated with what he was witnessing. The idea of spirits needing to roam, to stretch their spectral legs, so to speak, made a strange kind of sense. It wasn't menacing, just ... restless. That night, armed with new knowledge, Eleanor and Arthur decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to catch whatever was happening, they decided to observe it with respect. Following a suggestion from the old texts, they brought offerings to the Whispering Grove just before sunset: wildflowers, fresh water, and small, polished stones. They didn't stay to watch. Instead, Arthur spoke to the quiet graves, his voice filled with a newfound understanding. "Walk in peace," A sighed softly. "We mean, harm. This land remembers you." The next morning, Arthur woke with a sense of anticipation. He rushed to the cemetery, with Eleanor close behind. The air felt different, lighter, calmer. They walked to the Whispering Grove, and for the first time in years, there was no displaced dirt. There were no strange footprints on the paths. The flowers they had left were undisturbed, sitting peacefully on the grass. From that day on, the strange nightly activities ceased. Arthur, guided by Eleanor's research, incorporated the old traditions into his caretaking routine. He would leave small, respectful offerings, and speak to the silent residents, acknowledging their history and their connection to the land. The cemetery, once a source of fear for him, became a place of true peace. The story of Arthur and the moving graves became a quiet legend in Blackwood. It wasn't a tale of horror, but one of understanding and coexistence. It reminds us that history is layered, and the ground beneath our feet holds more stories than we can ever imagine. Sometimes, the most unbelievable tales aren't meant to scare us, but to teach us to listen to the whispers of the past. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more journeys into the unknown. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, stay curious.